Committee meeting. Good morning and welcome to the SACOG Transportation Committee meeting for Thursday, February 1st, 2024. Director Gog, will you please lead us in the pledge?
My pleasure. Salute, pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Director Gog. So next up is roll call, please.
Thank you. Good morning. Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman, Guerrero, an early absent, Howdesheld absent, Jennings, absent, Joyner,
Here.
Sander, absent, Vice Chair Gog,
Here.
Vice Chair Lauren, Chair Bradford,
Here.
and ex officio member Tacker for Aceves. Here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Just a quick note, I want to welcome everyone to the Transportation Committee. I think most of you are veterans. So Director Hauschelt, who is unable to make it today, is a new member of the committee, and I'm actually a new member this year. I was on the Transportation Committee 2 years ago and had the opportunity to vice chair. So I want to thank Chair Saragosa for allowing me to chair this year, and I'm excited to have Vice Chair Lauren and Vice Chair Gog here with me to help out. And so with that, we will move on to public communication. So.
Chair, there are no public communications.
Okay, I do have one. Sorry, I probably should have told you. I have one card from Mr. Barnburn. Would like to speak.
Item 3.
Oh, item 3. Sorry, thank you. Okay, with that, we will move on to the consent agenda, which is approval, one item, which is approval of the minutes from the last, from the December 7th meeting. So,
Second.
okay, I have a first and a second. Any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
Okay, seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye. You got Bruce.
Yes, thank you, Director Joyner. He's actually observing. We weren't able to notice his location on the agenda as required by Brown Act. So he's just observing, but we're happy to have him observing.
Great.
Our trouble.
Thank you for joining us anyway. So any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And with that, we're going to move on to the action items, starting with item 2, 2024 Transportation Committee Charge. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So in front of you today is the committee charge that we put forward with every committee at the start of the year that outlines the work that we anticipate will be coming forward through the Transportation Committee for some of the key decisions and key direction that we'll be looking for from this group. So all of these programs are in our overall work program, our OWP, and are in theory, trying to advance all of the priorities that we've established through our MTP-SCS and our upcoming blueprint, as well as advancing some other projects that we've been working on over the course of the past few years. Some highlights that I just want to add with this committee charge that you can maybe expect providing guidance or direction on. Our next gen transit strategy. So if you remember, that was adopted by the board a few years ago. We've been continuing work on that. There's 2 current efforts going on right now. The regional transit network, which you all have received some presentations on. We anticipate that wrapping up in April. And the mobility hubs design guidance, which is something that we just recently kicked off that Victoria Cacciatore, one of our senior planners here, is leading. That is something that we're really excited about, and you should be seeing some things related to that in the coming months, including a potential workshop when we're in Yuba City later this year in June to kind of talk a little bit about what those would look like. So those should be 2 really interesting projects. The regional transit network is going to wrap up in probably April or May. So your guidance towards the end of it will be really critical to that. We also are continuing on implementation of the regional trails network. We have some next steps listed for that, including taking a look at maybe some governance pieces, but also how we can sort of address some of the low-hanging fruit pieces to get the network implemented. Also grant funded efforts like our large mobility zones project, which we've talked a lot about, but that has officially kicked off. So that's going to be a really important effort. over the next few years, as well as a project called a US 50 Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan, which provides a lot of guidance for how the US 50 corridor will be planned on adjacent roadways as well as US 50. And that is a partnership with Caltrans. And I want to point out that that was brought forward last year as a new concept for us, where we have an MOU with Caltrans on how to sort of co-manage that, which is the first time we've done that. So we're really excited for that project to kick off this year. And then continuing things like our funding round, which you're going to hear some things about today, as well as our prioritization. Those will be two very big efforts for prioritization and the regional funding program development. And then, as we all know, CARTA and tolling and managed lanes will continue on this year. So anticipate some items there as well. So lots to do over the next year, and really appreciate all of your participation and support over the next year on these projects. So happy to answer any questions if you have any on the committee charge.
Any questions from the board on the committee charge? Any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
Okay, is there a motion?
Joyner moves approval. Second.
You have that. Okay, so we have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Motion passes unanimously. Next up is item 3, unmet transit needs findings for the Sacramento Regional Transit District, Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, Yuba counties, and the cities therein. Good morning, Barbara.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Had a little trouble last time I was here. So I'm going to talk to you today about the unmet transit needs findings. These findings will apply to next fiscal year for 24-25. So the State Transportation Development Act, or TDA, requires that SACOG make annual unmet transit needs findings for the Sacramento Regional Transit District, as well as the 4 counties for Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. So we've held all of our unmet transit needs hearings according to our process, which is shown in attachment A in your packet. The transit service requests that we receive during the unmet transit needs process, we evaluate those with our Social Service Transportation Advisory Councils. We call those STACs for short, to see whether they meet the adopted unmet transit needs definitions that the board approved. So we've met with all of our STACs, and they concur with all the unmet transit needs findings you'll see in your packet today. We have those summarized in attachment B, and then in attachment C, D, and E have more detail for you if you want to look through that. So with the completion of the unmet transit needs process, this will allow SACOG to continue apportioning Transportation Development Act local transportation funds for the coming fiscal year. And it also assists all of our jurisdictions and transit operators in the budgeting that they're actually doing right now for the coming fiscal year as well. So I'd like to ask the Transportation Committee, recommend the board first approve all of the minutes for the public events and hearings that we held for unmet transit needs, and then also adopt all of the attached resolutions regarding the fiscal year 24-25 unmet transit needs for each county, the cities therein, as well as the Sacramento Regional Transit District. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Barbara. Questions from the committee? Okay. Seeing none, I do know we have a public comment on this item. So, Mr. Barnbaum, sorry.
Thank you. While most of the report recommendations make sense and should be adopted by the committee to forward to the board for their approval in a couple of weeks, at least a couple of them, in looking at the charts, did not appear to make sense as to why the finding came back the way it did of a matter not being an unmet transit need. I don't know what page of the attachment this is, but I'm looking in the graph. It says about Route 9, new route by SAC-RT or Placer or both, operating from Hazel to Station to Sierra College, from Sacramento to Placer County. The comment is, it is currently possible to travel from Sacramento to Placer County, including Sierra College via SAC-RT with the transfer. And this is not an unmet transit need. Well, I looked at that, I said, well, yeah, you might argue that from the station itself to the college, it might be able to travel to, but what about the person living along the corridor in between the two locations and needs a midday bus route? there's still an unmet transit need for that person that is in there. Another example was Route 19 in Sac RT service area. Realign service in North Highlands along Elkhorn Boulevard, east of Watt Avenue and over I-82, Auburn Boulevard and Greenback Lane. Well, you might be able to get from Elkhorn and Watt to Auburn and Greenback, but somebody in between that area had a route prior to September of 2019 and now doesn't, and they kind of live halfway in between the two intersections and don't have a bus route. In the case like that, this is in reference to Route 19, currently traveling along Watt Avenue from Elkhorn to Alberta, but so also does Route 26. So the comment here was included perhaps to reduce redundancy and provide coverage along a corridor that doesn't have coverage. And I said, this is an unmet transit need, but the STAC feels it is not an unmet transit need. So I don't understand where they came up with the finding and what analysis or algorithm they used for that versus just seeing, okay, Elkhorn Boulevard doesn't have coverage. How do we do that? How do we meet that need? Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Can we have maybe staff reach out to Mr. Barnbaum after the meeting and just comment on what he brought up?
Sure, we can
Great.
definitely do that.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Any additional, oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Barbara, I'm looking at the, what is it here? It's the resolution approving all of this, and it defines reasonable to meet. Maybe in between the lines it's there, but the demand side of the equation. For example, there might be in the abstract, well, there's a gap physically in connections and what have you. But I know that you look at cost effectiveness, potential ridership. How closely is the demand side of the equation looked at when making a move from where we are now in terms of the transit structure to changing it to add additional routing or what have you?
The demand side is looked at. That's part of what, Mike mentioned, where we have part of the unmet transit needs definitions. And I'll just say in the resolutions, we don't put the entire definition because it's quite long. So we condensed it just so you know it's not missing, it's in there. But when
How is that done? How is that done? I'm curious.
When we look at the demand side, a lot of it, the information comes from our transit operators, that they're part of our social service transportation advisory councils that actually analyze all the comments we receive. So they look at if there's been expressed demand for these services in different areas that we talk about for the different routes. And frequently, if we only receive one comment, you're not going to start a new service because one person commented about lack of service in an area or service that's not as frequent as they would like. So that's how we look at the demand side of it, what people are actually wanting to see, services that they need to get from their home to work, to school, whatever.
That makes sense. They're the closest to the problem. Thank you.
Yes.
Any additional board comment or questions? Any public comment or questions? Okay,
No other public comment.
seeing no additional, entertain a motion. Have a first and a second. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Barbara. Motion passes unanimously. Next up is item 4, Regional Funding Framework. Morning, Chris.
I'm gonna
Oh,
talk about it
okay.
and hand it over to Director Joyner. So the item that you have today is related to the framework that we've been working on for the next regional funding round program. So staff has been working over the last year with staff from agencies within each of the 6 counties, as well as a board working group that has one representative from each county. to kind of figure out what this new funding round framework and funding landscape is going to look like after we were issued the corrective action and had to take another look at how our federal funds are distributed throughout the region. So our proposal, which as I mentioned, we have been working on closely with staff and board members, is to have a 6-county federal program and separate out the state funds in a 4-county state program. So previously we pooled all of our state and federal funds together. We are no longer able to do that anymore. So we felt it was really important to keep the 4-county process, but do the 6-county for the federal programs. So on the federal side, what we are proposing to do is have 2 programs underneath the federal dollars that are centered around or aligned with the dollars that we receive from the federal government. So those are congestion mitigation and air quality funds, or otherwise known as CMAQ, as well as state transportation block grant funds, or STBG. These programs have pretty clear goals, well, at least the CMAQ has pretty clear goals, and our STBG funds are pretty flexible in how we can use them. So we envision sort of a next gen solutions or clean air type of program with the CMAQ funds and a state of good repair program aligned with the STBG funds. These are consistent, both of these programs would be consistent with SACOG's strategic plan goals number 2 and 4, which have to do with building and maintaining a reliable transportation system, but then also thinking about sort of forward-thinking projects and innovative use of funds. On the state side, we are proposing a Fix It First program, which is consistent with the state's CAPDI program, which you may have heard about. It's Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. So we are looking at breaking that into 2 programs as well. One where the majority of funds are going to be available for an intra-county competition within each of the counties. So in other words, the local agencies within each of the respective counties would have a competitive call for projects for the funds that are available for their counties. And the remainder would be pooled together to support regional projects that might be ready for STIP funds, right for STIP funds, that we have prioritized regionally as an important project and sort of all agree that it's worth utilizing those pooled funds. So as a reminder, with the STIP funds, so the way the state distributes the funding is through county shares based on population and vehicle lane miles. So currently each county has their specific share. The way that we've structured this would sort of ensure that each county gets the majority of what their share is, but I will, repeat and really emphasize that this will be a competitive process for those funds. This was a program that we worked very closely with our staff representatives from each of the agencies in the region to find a balance that would work for them, where we could still pool, support large infrastructure projects that were ripe for STIP funds, but also provide some level of certainty in terms of the funding that might be returned to each county. That was something that was really important to the staff, and we found a solution that seemed to work for everyone. The actual percentage of that split that we're talking about has not been decided yet. That is something that is going to be a policy decision that the board will be making at a later date and will be dependent upon what our estimation is for the funding that might be available for the pot of money. We want to make sure that we understand what the numbers are before we start to talk about the split. So that is not part of this decision today. What we're really talking about with this is the boxes that we need to fill in with all of our policies to develop the guidelines. We want to make sure that we're all in agreement that this general 6-county and general 4-county structure works and makes sense for folks moving forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Director Joyner. He's a member of our board working group, so that he can kind of summarize some of the information that he's received.
Actually, I think you just did a great summary of all that we've been working through, but I'm happy to go through this very quickly for you. The board working group has been receiving information from SACOG staff, as you've heard. As this whole process was being developed, reasoning for the new process has been very clear to us, based on corrective action issued to Caltrans by Federal Highways Administration. The board working group met in January to hear a recap of recent staff working groups.
but also to confirm the proposed framework. And this group last met in September to discuss the framework, and overall, the board members were supportive of the structure presented by staff. The members suggested that the board have a role in this process moving forward. We just all felt that it was important to have that touchstone back to the full board from time to time, rather than just have this happening in a silo of the funding round group. So we've asked that that happen periodically moving forward to be able to help direct broader policy considerations and decisions for this particular element, the framework. It was important to the members, to the board members in the group, that this item come back to the full board to memorialize the framework. And at the September meeting, where we went into these in great detail, the board supported the staff's framework recommendations for the federal and state splits, which was consistent with what was received as feedback from the staff working group as well. And the board members and staff had extensive conversations. And for me, I think for Director Branscombe, that's one of the things that I'm enjoying about this smaller, somewhat informal group, is that we're able to have those conversations in a informal and conversational way. So for me, it's been very productive. We did have a robust discussion specifically surrounding the state pooling of funds with questions from Director Early on why we would be changing the current process and moving to a more county level approach. Ultimately, the split and the framework are clear, and the board continues to support this. The harder work will be coming with the details that fill in this framework, and we're anticipating seeing more board discussions along the way to help guide staff's work. And so the requested action today comes from the board funding round working group, and it is that the Transportation Committee recommend the board approve the regional funding framework.
Thank you, Director Joyner.
Thank you. You mentioned the allocations are based in part on lane miles. What were the other criteria?
It's population and lane miles for each of the counties.
Okay, Pop.
And that's a calculation that the state makes.
So why lane miles versus miles?
That would be a great question for the state. I'm not sure that we entirely.
I mean, are you
know.
required to do lane miles, or is that a choice?
That's their requirement. We don't have a choice.
Who's their requirement?
Yeah, we don't have any
Who's
say.
they?
The state of California, it's CTC and Caltrans that kind of work on that together. Sue Tacker might have some information on that.
I don't have information, but I can definitely get back to you, Mayor Branscombe, on that.
Well, it'd be interesting to know where that requirement comes from, because
It is part of our CAPTI document as to where it stems from. I can definitely get back to you.
it places counties like Sutter and Yuba at a significant disadvantage. We don't have multi-lane freeways coming through. Not like here. And I'd be interested in seeing what the allocation would look like if we're not lane miles, but just straight miles. I mean, there've been active conversations between people in Sutter and Yuba County wondering, are we that much like the rest of SACOG to where maybe we should look someplace else to call it home. And I'm not threatening anything here. I'm just talking. No, there's just background conversation. There's nothing active.
Yeah.
But yeah, that puts Sutter and Yuba County, Marysville, Yuba City, what have you, at a distinct disadvantage in these allocations. And I would wonder what the justification, there may be a wonderful justification for lane miles. It would be interesting to see that. And if Caltrans has information on it, I'm just inquiring.
Sure. No, we can look into that. It is interesting. There are some other counties in our region where the lane miles piece actually helps them in their allocations. Their populations might be lower, but they actually have a lot of lane miles. So it's not directly proportional to the population. And I think that the lane miles piece is probably to help ensure that it's not just based on population, because some of our rural partners have a lot of roadways, but they don't necessarily have the same in terms of population when you look at percentage. So I think it's done to kind of help that way, but we can look into it and talk to the state and see if they have more detail that we can provide you on why they use that.
Thank you.
Director Branscombe, I mean, I don't have the answer either, but even at the federal level, lane miles has traditionally been a very standard way of figuring out basically how much roadway do you have to maintain, right? Like how, if you have a 6-lane road or 4-lane road or 2-lane road, that's additional pavement that you've got to fix, maintain and keep updated, right? So lane miles has been a pretty standard way to do that. I will say, just to echo what Christina said, actually, and we could give you these numbers. If you look at that around the region, percentage-wise, I believe Sutter, Yuba, and Yolo have more percentage lane miles than they do population. So in some ways, that's a balancing out. Same.
That's because of the low population.
Yeah, yeah. But we'd be happy to look into the background, like Christina said.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question on that as well? Because this is an interesting conversation. I appreciate you bringing it up. Lane miles versus straight miles. And so it took me back to the question on population. So is there a formula that's used as far as whether it's percentages or what of population versus lane miles or population versus straight miles? Is there a formula that's used that's consistent within that?
So we don't have any part in that split, but Eric has just shared with me that it is 75% county population and 25% state highway miles. That's what the state uses to come up with those county by county allocations.
And this isn't a discretionary action, this is the state law, so this goes back to the 90s where things are split first between Northern and Southern California, where Northern California gets 40% of the funding, and 60% goes to Southern California. And then within there, it's divided 75% by population and 25% by state highway lane miles.
To the chair, quick follow-up. Thank you. Now, as James mentioned, there's more road to take care of, right? And I may be displaying some ignorance here, and I apologize if I am. Now, the interstate highways, are we responsible for maintaining those?
With our partners at Caltrans, yeah. Yeah, there's no.
So that money flows through SACOG?
Not at all. The bulk of it, I would say.
So
right,
we're really not responsible for,
well,
fully responsible on those lane miles.
I mean, how long do you have? So we, through federal policy and state policy the last 30 years, it used to be the feds raised the money, the federal gas tax gave it to the states, and Caltrans took care of everything. That was the way it happened 30 years ago. Now it's devolved more down to a regional level. So we have quite a bit of thing that comes to us that we do actually, you take actions, if you remember in your funding round, and you actually put some money on the state highway network. You also put some money off the state interstate highway network and onto more local streets or arterials or so. So we have some of that discretion, but Caltrans still has STIP and the ITIP and other funding sources that they use for interstates, some of which are federal funds, some of which are state funds. Go ahead, Sue.
Just want to add to that. We have various funding sources, as you know.
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, thank you.
So we have various funding sources for Caltrans projects. For the Fix It First or for the maintaining the state highway system, we use the State Highway Operation Protection Program, which is a SHOP. If we are making any kind of a capacity enhancements or any kind of changes to the freeway system, we have to go to other funding sources. Like for the YOLO 80 managed lane, we use the infra funds. We're also going to SACOG for discretionary funds to do different types of work on those projects because they're not SHOP eligible. They're not the maintaining or improving our current highway system.
What percentage comes through SACOG? You have a round number?
That may be a better question for SACOG. I can't. I don't
Let's
have
get
those
back to you
numbers.
on this.
No, it's kind of an equity thing as I'm, thank you.
Yep.
Any additional board comments on this item or questions? Okay, seeing none, any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
Okay.
Chair Bradford,
Oh, yes.
coming in from the virtual world. Thank you to Christina and SACOG staff for a very informative presentation. Thank you to the board members, the Transportation Committee board members for a very illuminating conversation. And thank you, board member Joyner and all the folks that worked on the funding formula in a really collaborative way. I think, we've come a long way in the last year and looking forward to the details now. So thanks everybody for the good work.
Thank you. Okay, so is there a motion?
Second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. So that's it for action items. Next, we have an information item, federal funding grant prioritization methodology. Now we'll let Chris present.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Chris Doherty on your transportation team here at SACOG. The item before you, what we're asking of you today is to get your feedback on a methodology for a strategy to prioritize projects for federal grant programs in the very near term. So since the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure bill in 2021, which authorized about $1.2 trillion in new transportation infrastructure funding, that funding was largely put into existing and new competitive grant programs. It was not just distributed by formula. Regions across the country have been competing against each other for those funds. While SACOG has had some successes in this environment, we have not fared as well as we had hoped for our larger regional projects. We believe that is largely for a couple different reasons. Mostly local projects have been submitted to these grant programs by local entities. So they have not had a lot of regional collaboration and push from the region to move those projects forward. We understand every city and county in the region has a long list of local projects that are struggling to move forward, from fixing roads to new bike trails, enhancing transit, and supporting new infill development. But at the same time, we have some large projects that we are trying to move forward to really help implement the MTP-SCS. The strategy that we're asking for feedback on today is really to help us compete better at the federal level, to prioritize some of these larger projects that are more eligible for federal funding, so that our funding round, if those projects are not putting pressure on our funding round then has more capacity to address some of these local projects. There's a constant tension in our funding round between these large projects and the small local projects that our agencies need. So to address this, we're hoping to develop a short list of projects that will be applying for federal funding. And the goal is to have these projects back in front of the committee and the board in March of this year, so they can be taken to the Cap to Cap program as an advocacy platform, but also used over the next year for this round of federal funding that's coming up. We do expect, if this moves forward like we would hope, that we would expand on this, come into the summer for the state SB1 programs that are also going to be a large call for projects that are coming online fall-ish of this year for those large state SB1 programs. So again, we're asking for your feedback today on this strategy as we are moving this forward. I'll kind of outline the strategy. It's in the staff report, but we have some primary eligibility requirements. First and foremost, are those jurisdictions, are they seeking federal funds for those projects? I don't want to put a project on a list that they have no intention of seeking federal funding for. Is that project currently in our current MTP-SCS, ideally in the first 10 years, so that it is more relevant and ideally moving forward when it's planned to move forward? And has there been a SACOG past funding award on it? Have we invested in that project already? Or has there been some significant funding from other sources put on that project, so it's really ready for its kind of final federal pot of money to finish that project? We're looking at breaking these into project types, and we're still going back and forth looking if we're going to pair a project to a direct funding source or a series of funding sources. And that is largely because there are a couple large projects at the federal level, mainly RAISE and infra, that have a really wide eligibility. A lot of different types of projects can compete for those, whereas large bridge projects or rail projects or transit projects are really defined and really honed in. So we can pair a project with those programs. So we're looking for project types like bridges, as I said, managed lanes and roads, rural projects. There's a lot of good rural project programs out there that we'd like to tap into. Passenger rail, transit, climate, and adaptation are just some of the suggestions that we have moving forward. To evaluate the projects, and I will say we're working with our local agencies right now to identify what those projects are. But to evaluate them, what we're looking for is regional serving projects first. Are these serving and meeting regional needs? Are they improving regional mobility? Are they accelerating VMT greenhouse gas reduction projects? Are they helping the regional plan by advancing some of these projects? Are they advancing regional goals or initiatives? Are there partnerships with multiple agencies? Are people teaming up to put a regional project together, or are they crossing agency boundaries? That's how we're loosely defining regional in this strategy. Next, we're going to look at competitiveness. How does the project align with federal goals? How does it align with the program that's identified? But there's also been a very large emphasis on both climate and equity at the federal level. And we want to make sure that these projects can speak to those to be competitive and align with our own policies and goals here at SACOG around climate and equity. And also readiness. Is the project seeking that last portion of funding to move it across the finish line? Really, that's generally been the successful model for federal funding. And to justify that, we're looking for maybe large projects that are over $15 million to have completed the environmental phase of that project. Removes the majority of the risk of that project, and they're usually coming to the end of the design, and they've selected a project type, and they're looking for that construction funding at that time. But smaller projects sometimes do that and have less risk in that environment. So sub $15 million projects don't have that requirement as we are suggesting moving forward. So this is the general, evaluation criteria that we're using at this point. So at this point, we are seeking your feedback on that, and I'm happy to answer any questions or any comments you may have.
Dr. Branscombe.
Thank you. If I understand correctly, we have not been as competitive as we think we should have been in the past.
Correct.
And that has been primarily because perhaps we have too long a list. And I remember, I think it was in a conversation with James recently where the example was Cleveland, where they had one or two or three, maybe one. Okay, one. So you go in with one, because obviously you go in with a long shopping list, people's eyes glaze over, right?
Mm-hmm.
Come in with one, it'll get a lot of attention.
Right.
If that's the approach, I completely agree.
Director Branscombe, I think I would say we have two issues federally, and we're not alone in this. One is we have a long list, and it doesn't obviously appear that we have any strategic priorities. And the second is I think we need to be better at storytelling and narrative. The Cleveland region, as you mentioned, good memory, is actually has adopted a policy. They have one project across multiple counties in that metropolitan region that they take for each federal grant program, and they rally behind it. We're happy to give you more information about how they do it. I don't think we're necessarily saying we get down to one right away, but if Cleveland can do it, by God, we should be able to.
Well, if there's a success model, let's follow it.
I would add the theming of the project type is really kind of built in here to avoid that intra-project competition, so that we're kind of keeping them in their lane, for lack of a better term, but really so that a bridge project isn't competing against a road project versus a trail project.
Are those federal funds, just so I'm clear on this, are those allocated, who are we competing against right now? Is it other jurisdictions that are competing with what we're submitting, or is it other metropolitan regions that we're up against?
Both. Our region is competing against other regions, but we've not put, as James said, really a regional priority together and compete against other regions. So right now, local jurisdictions, every city and county that are submitting to a federal grant, there's probably several local projects that are competing at the national level. The feedback we have heard from our federal partners is that those regional projects with that regional story really make a project more competitive.
Sure. And is there a sense of how many of those projects within our region are getting funded? Like, so like for a county or a jurisdiction, like what would be the advantage of that of Yolo County or the city of Davis saying, no, we're not gonna, apply for those funds. We're gonna attach our cart to SACOG. And then if we have the possibility of getting those on our own, like, why would we give that up is what I'm saying. I mean, I'm not saying this is what we would do. I understand the regional approach. I'm just saying, how do we go back to our staffs and have those conversations? Are those jurisdictions currently getting awards, and why would they change their method of success, as Board Member Branscombe said?
That's a great question. I think first and foremost, this is not looking to limit anybody else from applying for federal
Okay.
projects. That is not our intention. Our intention is to put together a regional priority list so at least we're communicating that to the federal government. So if there's a project you think that would compete well at the local level in that, absolutely, submit that to those programs. We are just trying to better define and put a little more endorsement behind some of these projects that we think can move across the goal.
Director Chapman, yeah, I agree. It's a good question. This maybe sounds simpler than it will be in practice because of regionalism, right? And the upside and downside of that. So it sounds good on paper, but if we're saying as a region, we should rally behind a certain project that is maybe not yours, right? You might have
Don't look at me when you say maybe not.
So a great example of this, as Director Joyner pointed out in the Funding Round Working Group, is the mega region dozen. Okay, so that was actually sort of that kind of almost like organically came to be. I mean, a lot of work behind it. I mean to say there wasn't a lot of work behind it, but 12 projects right across the 16 counties that our region, San Joaquin County and the Bay Area rallied behind. When we've gone back to Washington, D.C. and shown that list and that map, and they said, wait, you're all behind these projects? These are your priorities? It's a breath of fresh air for them. And I can't necessarily connect the dots with you honestly, but I will say, right, those projects are getting funded. Those projects between Third Track and Valley Rail, and not entirely, not exclusively, and your question's a good one in terms of success rate, right? But we have heard this feedback continuously from our federal partners. We don't know what your priorities are. We're not sure how this hangs together. And the next question you're asking is, would that make us more successful? And I think there we just have maybe anecdotal evidence right now.
So,
My comment was just, thank you very much for, I didn't mean to throw that. I wanted to say thank you for your presentation, but mainly that centerpiece of competitiveness, I think really speaks a lot about our region, that climate is in there, and that our values of DEI, are reflected in there. And I just hope that we're open to that as we look at equity, we'll learn more about equity, and then how that looks will change. And I hope that we just stay open to that, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Sure. So this is an annual exercise? So it being an annual exercise, pared down list, which will have more, which based on what we've observed, would have a higher possibility of success, will disappoint some. There's no question about that. And so perhaps then you rack and stack, and here's the ones we're going for this year, and this is what we're looking at next year. And that may facilitate getting a broad base of support for it.
So just one comment and then a couple questions. So thanks, James, for bringing up the mega region working group. I was thinking about that myself, and how successful that I feel that's been, and really rallying the mega region around truly mega regional projects, right, that really do connect the mega region. In addition to that, I think, and I'm not saying that we need a project from each of the 6 counties on our list, but I think one of the things that helps with respect to the mega region is there are 4 projects from each of the 3 regions within the mega region. So it's kind of a twofold approach. And one, we're looking at projects that really are mega region connecting in nature, but the projects are spread throughout the mega region. And so no one really probably feels like they're getting slighted. And so as we move forward with this, again, not saying we need a 1 from every 6 county, but spreading it around as well as we work through that is probably helpful in getting buy-in from all the jurisdictions, in addition to, right, making sure, as it's already on here, right, that it's regional in nature and regional in benefit. So the two questions, all three eligibility items, I assume it's an all, it's not a,
Correct.
okay. And then, do you have the project types, are those federally defined, or was that something that SACOG kind of came up with? And if it's in either case, do you kind of have examples of what would be defined as like a rural project?
So for the rural project, I leaned into the federal designation for rural projects because that really defines and that opens up what programs they can apply to. So those maps are available. We're happy to share them with you so that you know where those geographic boundaries are for what the federal government designates as rural versus urban.
Okay, so it's not so much about the specific project type, it's about the project location.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. That's it for me. Any additional board? Yeah.
Just curiosity really, James, of the 6 counties of SACOG, how many of us are self-help counties? One. So as we try to put together a regional approach to this, obviously the competitiveness of the one is much greater than those of us who are not yet a self-help county. So
Yeah, and remember, that's part of your revolving match fund in your in the funding round that, you know, you put aside some money right in the previous funding cycle to actually match projects. And if they don't win the grants, they come back into a pool. I think it's it's pretty nice approach that way, because only one of you of the 6 have the self-help. Now you sometimes have other ways in which to find some match money. But that is the match is one of, I think, several sort of challenges we have for sure.
is there a regional approach to that?
Well, the regional approach is the revolving match. I mean, that's the best, at least that we've had so far. I'm looking at staff here. You know, I think maybe we could explore that a little bit more as we fill in the boxes of the funding round and think about how to do that. That's the best I can come up with right now. I mean, you basically want a flexible source of funds that you can deploy to projects, allow them to be competitive. Remember, in the big infrastructure bill from a couple of years ago federally, most of that increase, we're hearing about all that huge increase in funds, it's these competitive programs, right? Those did not flow down necessarily to the states or regions. And so that's why we have to go be competitive. We got to go compete for that increase in funds. And part of being competitive, not all, is, we've mentioned, priority, strategic, narrative and everything else. And part of it is match.
And just to add one finer point on that, the discussion we had in the last item around that percentage of the STIP funds to hold back, that is exactly its intent, is to apply that level of how do we move forward those regional projects by holding back a little bit of that.
Any additional board question or comment? Okay, seeing none, do we have any public comment on this item?
I'm guessing one.
No public comment.
I think we do have, hiding behind.
Kevin Busey, Sacramento Transportation Authority. I want to address the comment about the self-help counties component. Yeah, Sacramento County is the only self-help county within the 6-county region. I think one of the challenges that we have on the local match side within Sacramento County is our measure was approved 20 years ago. And so a lot of the current grant criteria doesn't really align with our current projects. So a good example of that might be the I Street Bridge. Like, that's not a project listed in our expenditure plan. And a lot of our funding, it's very formulaic going out for street and road maintenance, as an example. So just the fact that we have our own measure doesn't necessarily mean that the match coming out of that measure aligns with the federal programs that are currently available. That's one thing. A couple other things too. I just wanted to state that I do support the whole idea of prioritization. I think there's definitely a benefit to it from a region. So as all the counties and the cities and the special districts are applying for these funds, it's very important that at a regional level, we're speaking with one voice when we go back at cap to cap and talk about these projects. And I think it'll really increase our competitiveness to do that. Now, that being said, just the effort to do that is going to be very challenging. Trying to get everybody to agree to a subset of projects. That's the hard part, but I think we should definitely do that hard work and go back to cap enforce and try to get funding for those projects. And then next year we'll do the same and so on and so forth. So with that, that is my comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think we've got an additional public comment.
Good morning. I'm Tiffany Scott. I'm the CEO at Paratransit, but today I'm here as one of the co-chairs for Cap to Cap for Transportation with Christina Svensk. We're really excited to see you guys talking about this today. We've put a lot of effort this year with Stephen Clark, who's bringing back aviation to what transportation is going to look like. And so I can announce that we're going to have all new papers. And so this idea of having prioritized projects really helps drive that. Storytelling is a big part of how we're going to be working with transportation this year, because just as Chris had mentioned, there's the big projects, but the small projects. And so we feel the storytelling and really leaning into the why. How does it connect to workforce improvements? How does it connect to wildfire and safety? How does it connect to access for healthcare and education and those pieces that are really important? Really open the door to not only these projects, which will be at the larger mega scale, but also to include those smaller projects that there was question about. There are a lot of grants that are in that smaller dollar threshold, whether it's at the planning phase, a small implementation or operational phase, that those papers are now going to be structured to not only highlight these projects, but lean into the why. What is our region accomplishing through our transportation network to solve the other priorities in DC? And that an investment in transportation isn't just a road investment. It's helping do response in emergencies. It's about helping create workforce and get people employed or get them better employed and actually moving them up into higher quality jobs. It's about how we solve food insecurity. And so it's about creating this whole story and creating a pathway that'll also allow us to talk about how those smaller projects actually serve as the connector to that larger project. And it's this true interconnection. And so one of the papers will truly be about the connected network, which goes from the smallest project to the mega project. And we feel that with your support, this structure can really help drive in those conversations at all levels for that. So we look forward to working with you.
Great, thank you, Tiffany. I look forward to it as well. Okay, any additional public comment on this item or board question or comment? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to other matters. James, Christina, you guys have some?
Yes.
Okay.
I got a couple, Chair Bradford. First of all, I hope you're getting my executive director update and you read through that, and good, thumbs up. So just a few dates. First off, and you have a printout here. We are really excited to continue the rotation of the board meetings around the region this year. We had 3 counties last year. We're going to have the other 3 counties this year. We are next going to Yolo County and the county seat of Woodland. Woodland is very excited. Director Vega, very excited. City Manager Ken Hyatt. We're going to do a tour. This is part of our racial equity action plan and our commitment to having the board understand the region, the diversity of the region, both in terms of race, ethnicity, income, geography, and also highlight a lot of food and ag. As I was told, you can't come to Yolo County without talking about food and ag. So please mark your calendars. You should actually have a calendar invite from Lynette. We're going to start early in Woodland. For some of you, that would be great because it'll be closer. For others of you, that'll be further away. But if you can mark your calendars for 8 a.m., we're going to push the board meeting back to 10 a.m. We're going to have a great tour. Woodland is very excited to see you all. So please, March 21st, Thursday, March 21st, tour at 8-ish roughly, and you got the printout there, and then the board meeting in Woodland. It's very, very important for the region that you all are there. Right, Director Hadashell?
Absolutely. Ag is innovation, baby.
We did not rehearse that, by the way.
No. Hey, the Pelton Wheel started, Director Bradford knows the Pelton Wheel started in Browns Valley in the late 1800s.
We're going to be seeing things like the Ag Start Lab in downtown Woodland. So we're going to hear from the Center for Land-Based Learning. So we're going to actually cover the entire triple bottom line in this tour and during the board meeting. And we're very excited. Woodland is very excited to see you. Number one. Second is, many of you responded, but as you heard from Chair Saragosa, the number one request for beyond the board meetings this year from the board in the survey you filled out in December was, let's go somewhere. Let's go to a peer region. That's going to be Denver. And you have 3 dates out there, date pairs, end of May, middle of June, end of June. If you haven't already gotten back to Lynette, if you can, we want to nail that down. Again, our partners in Denver are very excited to see you all. We're trying to get a date together. And then we will start working on that agenda and put it all together. And finally, I want to congratulate our staff. If you saw, they had a WTS award last night, the scholarship dinner for the Regional Trails Plan. That is all about the recognition of the very, very hard work on the Regional Trails Plan that's led by many people. If I start naming names, you'll be here the rest of the morning because it was truly a team effort. I know the board's been really engaged in that. Stay tuned for next steps on the Trails Plan, by the way. You may hear a little bit out in Yolo County. We have our carbon reduction program where trails is an eligible activity for grants coming up the end of February. But I want to give recognition to your staff. And I will mention one name, and that's Victoria Cacciatore, because Victoria really, among many others, heart and passion and soul into that project. The recognition is really well deserved for our staff on that project. And so thanks to all you for support on that, and just want to recognize the great work of staff.
Thank you. Any board comments before we adjourn? Yeah.
Mayor Branscombe, you were talking about the center lane miles versus all miles, right? So I would suggest taking a look at the State Transportation Highway Improvement Program guidelines on the CTC webpage. That's where Eric was citing the information regarding the county and the STIP shares. There are places where they use different configurations, lane miles for center lane miles based upon the project type, if it's a highway bridge replacement, rehab, or for distressed lane miles. So if you want more information, that's a good source of reading to get to what you're trying to get to. All right.
Great, thank you. Oh, Director Habachel.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Bradford. I think most folks know, but Saturday, 7 a.m. Wheels Up, the Greater Sacramento Economic Council, and is taking a trip to Germany. Myself, Vice Mayor Bernasconi, Vice Mayor Gallardo, community college presidents. It's going to be a very exciting trip. We're going to see mobility centers. We're going to visit, first of all, the most exciting part is that we land at 9:40 a.m. on Sunday after 8 hours on a plane and get on what's called the Intercity Express, and we take a train ride to the first city. So it is, I think we're going to visit 5 cities in 4 days. So it will be, we'll be bringing back hopefully some new technology and mobility and making those important connections. So just wanted to share that with the group.
Great, thank you. Okay, and with that, we will adjourn.